Hello everyone. So in this next step, we are going to continue creating our Neo4j full stack CRUD. Just to remember what we saw in the last video, this is the application that we are building, and we have this movies database, and we are going to create all the CRUD methods to interact with movies, with people. We will create a graph, a visualization of the data, and we will have this shortest path functionality. All right, and in the last video, in the last chapter, we created the base NX monorepo structure, and we have this empty React frontend, and we also have the API working. So here we are listing the movies, and the data is coming from our Neo4j local database. All right, let's go back to the GitHub repository, and we are going to access the wiki. So in the first, we checked how to create we went through the NX setup, and we also went through this second step. So now let's check this API structure. We also, like I said before, we already have the API working, but now we are improve the API structure. So first thing, I'm going to move the tutorial to my second screen, and here we have the VS Code already running. In this left terminal, NX is running with its backend and frontend, and in the middle we have the Docker with Neo4j instance running as well. Let's make more room to our third terminal here, integrated in the VS Code. And the first step is to create a .env to hold our environment variables. I'm going to create an example file, and so we are going to define the default port to run our backend, and we are going to set the API endpoint for Vite, for the front end, Vite React application. So it's going to be a localhost and the same port of the backend, of course. Now let's set some Neo4j variables. Okay, we are going to have the URL. So we are going to use both protocol, and it will be localhost 7687 and Neo4j database, the default Neo4j database, and Neo4j username, it will be empty, and Neo4j password, it will be empty as well. All right, now that we have this example, let me check if I save it. It's in the correct folder. No, I'm going to move it to the roots of our application. All right, now it's in the correct location. So now let's copy this .env.example to become only .env. And we need to ensure that our .env will be ignored in our Git configuration. So we are going to add .env to git ignore. All right. This will ensure that our words and usernames will not be exposed to the repository. All right. Now let's create some interfaces, some types. So just to remind us to remember that our types they are defined in the shared folder. We need to open the source, types, and here inside types we are going to create a new file called API.ts. This one we are going to use to customize our Axios error. So let's import Axios error from Axios, all right, and export API error, which will be something that will have an error property, and it will be a string, not forgetting to export type, of course. And now let's export type Axios custom error equal Axios and our API error inside. Alright, let's save it, and now let's create another file, call it app response ts app response. Here we are going to customize express response. So let's import response from express, and let's import API error from API error, and let's define type response body using a generic will be an API error or the generic type. Export app response generic, it will be equal to the express response containing a response body that we defined, export type. All right, this interface will be responsible to, we are going to add it to our backend responses, and so our backend responses will contain the records that we are going to use this T, so it will be a collection of movies or a collection of people, or it will be an API error, like if the database is down, it will return an API. All right. We just created two new, and we need to expose them, export them through the types index.ts. So I'm trying to keep alphabetical order here. So I export everything from API error and export everything from app response. All right. This is the first step of our API improvements in its structure. Now let's define a configuration file, and first of all we need to customize the global type of Express. To do that, we are going to go to package, API, source, and new file, global ts. And here we need to declare global, and namespace will be Express, and inside we are going to create an interface for the requests, and Neo4j session, it will be optional, and we need to import Neo4j driver here .session, and finally export. All right, now let's create our configuration to hold all the .env environments here in the Express. So inside API source, let's create a folder called config, and here we are going to have index file, and we need to import env from .env, great, and we need to initialize .env calling its config. From .env we'll extract everything that we defined in our .env. So it will be Neo4j URL, and here I'm going to copy Neo4j username, Neo4j password, and Neo4j database. It will be equal process.env. Alright, and now let's export. This const config will be equal to Neo4j. Everything from Neo4j, it will be inside Neo4j. URL will be Neo4j URL, and the username, it will be equal Neo4j username. Alright, and the password will be equal Neo4j password, and database will be equal Neo4j database. Okay, we have now our configuration file. Let's close those files and create another one. This one will be our first middleware, and so we are going to create a new folder, call it middleware, and inside it let's create a error handler.ts. We are going to add this middleware to customize express error, so we don't need to care to do it for every request. We have this generic error handler, and we are going to import next function from express. We also need to import request. Okay, and from Neo4j we need to import Neo4j error, and we need to import app response from our shared package. And let's export the error handler. Exporter const error handler. It will be equal a function that will receive a Neo4j error request, that will be express request, and a response will be equal that response that we created, and the next function will be express next function, of course, and inside it we are going to console.log the error, and we are going to send a response with status 500, and we are going to send that format that we set in our app response. Next step, let's go to our Neo4j session middleware. So new file and the Neo4j session.ts, and we are going to import request response and next function from express, and we are going to import Neo4j from Neo4j driver, and we are going to import our configuration from /config, and we're going to export our Neo4j session. It will be equal to request, to accept a request, and a response, and we'll receive a next function as well, and it will be arrow function containing. So here we are creating this Neo4j session middleware. It's a way to not needing to connect to Neo4j in every session. So our Express application will call this middleware for every request and will connect to the Neo4j session and will return this session. It will make this session available inside the request. So what do we need to connect to Neo4j? We need to, of course, we need to URL and username, password, and things like that. So we are going to extract it from the URL, we are going to extract URL, username, password, and database from our config Neo4j. And the we are going to create an authentication basic, and we are going to pass username here and the password. Also, the driver, we need to customize the driver. We are going to use this method driver, where we need to pass the URL and the auth and some options here. We need to disable lossless integers true to make Neo4j handle integers like the JavaScript. So const session will be equal to driver dot session, and we need to choose the database here, which will be our database. All right, the request, so we are going to define the request Neo4j session will be equal to our session here, and we are going to listen to the finish, and when our request finishes, it will automatically close the Neo4j session to ensure that the session will not be left opened, and it will continue to our request. All right. Now, following the same pattern that we used before, we have two middlewares here. Let's create an index file .ts, and let's export everything from error handler, and export everything from Neo4j session. All right. Okay. And now the movies controller. In the previous step, we put everything that we are creating now. It's just to abstract everything from inside. Everything, but almost everything from these get movies, because we are going to have several resolvers, and of course we don't want to repeat the code. So we already handled this Neo4j connection, and now we are going to move this code to controller. So let's create a folder, controllers, and inside it let's create a file called movies.ts. This file needs to import next function from Express. It needs to import app response from our shared types, and as we are going to handle movies, we are going to import movie as well, and we are going to import everything as graph from our graph library. And let's export our controller, const movies controller. It will be equal. Movies controller will have many methods for each endpoint. So first of all, get all will be an async with request and response will be app response that will respond with a collection of movies or an error, of course, and the next function will be express next function. Okay, inside it, we are going to have a try catch, and the try, we are going to get the movies from the API, from the graph. So graph.movies, we need to pass a session. The session will be our request Neo4j session, and from that we need to get all movies. And finally, response.send movies. And in case of catch, we are going to use R, and they're going to call to pass the error here. This catch will trigger the middleware to handle errors. All right. Okay, we already have get all. We need to add the other methods. So get by ID will be responsible to get one single movie by its ID. As those methods we are not going to implement right now, but I'm going to mark them. So request, response, it will be an app response. And here, the response, it's not going to be a collection, it's going to be a single move, so it's not an array. And here we need to have the next function as well. And finally, it will be, we'll have this same pattern, but not right now. I'm going to just send a string here and mark them as to be implemented. So type checking is triggering here because we are returning a string, and the app response expects a movie. So temporarily we are going to change it to a string. All right, and let's copy this method here and replace get by ID with create, which will be another method to create movies in the future, and another one to update them, and another one to remove them. In our tutorial, we are not going to use delete, we are going to use remove, because delete is a reserved word in JavaScript. So to avoid any conflict, let's use remove. Following the same pattern, let's create an index.ts and export everything from our movies controller. All right, it's here. And let's create a route. So new folder here in the Express structure, routes, and new file, it will be movies.ts, and we need to import router from Express. We need to import movies controller from the controllers, and let's define a router here to be an Express router, and the router.get. So here is the root of our endpoint, and we will call movies controller dot get all. Okay, the same pattern we are going to use to a single move, but here of course it will be get by ID, and post we are going to create a move, and to update a move that will have this pattern, let's movies controller dot update. Finally, router dot delete. Of course, we are going to delete some movie with a specific an ID dot remove. Now let's export the full router, all right, and let's create an index file for the routers, index.ts. In this specific scenario, we can't just export everything. We need to create a router and to inject this router in our Express application. So we need to import router again here from Express, and we need to import our movies router from movies, and let's define routers equals router and routers dot use. So everything / movies will use the movies router. So let's export the full routers. Let's check this error here. Okay, we need to call it as a function here. All right. Finally, let's open our main application. And as I said before, we are going to remove everything from here. And our app is going to use body parser to return JSON responses. It will use cars, so our front end will be able to access it. We need to import body parser. Okay, let's import here and import cars from cars as well. And we need to import our routers from routes. Neo4j we are not going to use anymore because this code is already in the controller and the movies also. And after the cars, let's make sure to use the middleware Neo4j session and app.use our routers and app.use our error handler middleware as well. All right, and yeah, look, the code looks good. The application is already running here, just to remind us that application is already running here, and let's test it. So we are going to bring our browser here and our API, and let's reload. And all right, it's running. Of course, the response we get is the same one, but now we have all the necessary and a better structured code that will be useful to us to keep going to our application. And not just in this Neo4j tutorial, but everything all the structure that we used in the Express, it's useful for any other Express application. All right, thank you very much. Bye bye.